Hello there. This is a subject I feel quite passionate about. Um, so much so, I wrote a section of a book, The Druid Garden, about food, food basically, fruit and vegetables. Because I think something terrible's happened in the history of humanity, which really began around the end of World War One, and that is the industrialization of our food. So I actually go into the history of gardening and food production in the book at the beginning. And when I was researching the book, it was quite shocking. You know, you got sort of the beginnings of the fertilizer industry were in the late 1800s, replacing guano, which is basically bird poo. And this became more and more industrialized, and over the process of bombing people in World War One, they realised that where all this nitrogen based bombs had been used, there was increase in fertility, and so we had tremendous growth of plants. So they thought, oh well, what can we do with all this stuff that we're not making millions of bombs anymore? We'll make industrial fertilizer. So in World War Two, you had like food shortages and difficulty with storage. There's always been the problem of providing food when you're on a war campaign. Famously, Napoleon brought, wine bottles, full of peas and such like. I think they were probably in vinegar rather than wine. So he brought portable food with him, which was quite an innovation at the time. People had barrels and stuff, but actually sort of putting things in jars was quite an interesting innovation. So, I mean, we've known how to do things like pickling and salting, preservation, smoking as well, for a long, long time. So we know how to preserve food. But what has happened is during World War II and after, this sort of desiccation process was perfected, and sort of powdered egg, powdered everything. So more and more cheap and efficient ways of making food have been investigated. You had the whole rise in sort of artificial colorings, artificial additives, things like thickeners and binders, etc., which all had in Europe they're called E-numbers, these attached to these various chemicals. That's become a bit of a thing in recent decades. But this is basically a very, very gradual process that's happened of moving from natural food, which people grew. A few generations ago, people were actually still growing their own food. People kept chickens. People may have had a pig or a goat or two or a few cows. I'm not talking about professional farmers, just general people who had a small holding. And they would have their own like mini abattoir, basically a shed they'd use. And they'd kill the animals really quickly and then butcher them. And then they'd either be eaten or preserved. And with the vegetables, people didn't have an option of, pardon me, anything other than organic methods. They'd have to make their own compost and come up with their own innovations to deal with pests and diseases. So over time, we've shifted more and more and more towards industrialization and commercial food. I remember when I was a kid, this is in the 70s, supermarkets were like a kind of a relatively new thing then. I think they've been around in the States a lot longer, but in Europe they were fairly kind of a new thing. The grocer's shop was what most towns and villages had. and that became more and more popular. And look, now that is the norm. That's the norm. You have like mini supermarkets now. In Ireland, it's like the likes of Londis and Mace and Spar, and Centra is a big one as well. Um, and you have very, very few of these actual real grocers shops that belong to private individuals. And the situation has got so bad now that when you walk into any like food shop, you'll be lucky if actually 5 to 10% of the actual food on sale is natural food. I mean, unmessed with, like actual vegetables, actual bits of meat that haven't been messed with. Literally just meat that's been chilled and put into some kind of container, and that's it. Or vegetables that have been picked and just put into boxes or put into bags, and that's it. In some shops it's like not even 5%. Their section of fresh food is so tiny, it's just shocking. And that's just become normal. It's become completely normal. But this is appalling. This is why everybody's so sick. Why there are more chemist shops in an average town than there are actual sort of supermarkets in Ireland. Why so many people are on prescription drugs for half their life or more than that. Why life expectancy is actually beginning to go down. Why everyone's suffering from all kinds of digestive problems, from IBS, from allergies, you name it, gluten intolerance, etc., etc. It's all down to the way our food is grown and our way our food is prepared. And people can't even cook anymore to a large extent. I learned to cook. I know how to cook from scratch, from raw food to finished product. And I think most of my family have a reasonable idea about cooking, but I know the people that can't cook at all. They just order takeout or they buy processed, ready-made food. And there's a lot of problems with this because this is commercialization gone insane, because obviously commerce has always existed. There's always been a business. But food was something that people grew themselves, people made themselves, and going out to a restaurant was a treat for most people. Getting takeaway was a treat. And some people never did such things in their entire lives. People who couldn't afford it, they would just make their food and eat it. But now it's just been totally commodified, turned into commerce, so to the point that food isn't really food anymore. What people are eating now is processed junk. It doesn't even really fit the definition of food in many cases, because it's of no actual real benefit to you. Because to be any use, it needs to not only contain calories, but it has to have some nutritional benefit. And so much of the food now is totally industrialized, full of salt, fat, sugar, seed oils, artificial chemicals, all kinds of horrific additives. And even the source of what we're eating, the original unprocessed products, are often laced with things like glyphosate, which is known to cause Hodgkin's lymphoma and other problems. So, like, before you even get started, with the raw products of soy and wheat, etc., and corn especially, they're already full of pollutants before you even do anything with them. And this is really, really unbelievably shocking. I watched this film called Toxic Nation, which focuses on America, but EU legislation is getting more and more ridiculous, and they want to allow some of this horrific GMO food into Europe, and are doing more and more so, and changing the legislation so they don't even have to declare it. So it's got to the point where most of what you can buy is really just not worth buying. I remember when I was younger, I worked in a certain hamburger chain with, these arches and a red and yellow color scheme. I mean, I was a chef, if you want to call it a chef, for a very short time. But I mean, the food was just absolutely industrialized. Everything was frozen apart from I think the lettuce and the onions. The onions were like ultra processed in some kind of preservative liquid. The lettuce was vacuum packed in vinegar, and the sell by date on it use by date was like 3 years ahead. So, or it was already nearly 3 years old. So you got a 3-year lifespan on the lettuce. So when you take it out, you left it to dry out, so it looked like normal lettuce. But I mean, it's been adulterated. So, when you present the food to the customer, it all looks fine. But when you're assembling it, you couldn't really call it cooking, it's assembling. You realize that it's just junk. It isn't actually proper food at all. And that's the real problem that we have in the world. Toxic food supply. The food that's being supplied to the production areas, or the factories, if you like, some of it's already been adulterated before they even start using it, because it's covered in pesticides or it's GMO. And then they just adulterate the food more and more and more. So when you get the product in the pack, the writing on the back, which explains what's in it, the ingredients, etc., is so tiny you can barely read it. So we're just looking at the covers of things. You look, oh, that looks nice, that looks tasty. And we got images of, vegetables being grown all lovely, and is that nice? And vegetable, are sort of mass produced in a not great way these days. And then look at animals. You have images of a cow or pigs running around in the field. It all looks very lovely. But the sad reality is, in many cases, quite horrific. But of course, they use clever marketing and advertising to sort of cover all this up and give us the impression that everything's fine. That the food we're getting is great, it's good quality, it's tasty, and good for you. Well, it might be tasty, but that's pretty much down to food science now, where they figure out how to make you become addicted to their products, trying to make it as tasty as possible, as cheaply as possible. It's all down to economics and commercial considerations. Human health isn't really part of the food industry anymore. It's not a consideration. In most cases, it's purely about selling you junk that's going to make you sick, and the company making absolutely massive profit. So I would say most food production companies, certainly on a large scale, they don't care about your health. They really don't care. And even some of the smaller ones, their priorities are trying to make a buck. And it's increasingly difficult to make money if you're anywhere in that chain, apart from the supermarket and the actual manufacturer, like big companies that I'm not going to name any of them, because obviously there could be problems. But all these big, huge companies, many of their brand names, they're making a fair bit of money, and so is the supermarkets selling them. But all along that chain, from the farmer and various stages along, they're all getting absolutely hammered. So, you know, and the public is getting hammered too, not just financially in the cost of food, which is going up and up, but hammered in terms of health, in that we're eating this rubbish and it's making us sick. So really, the point of this video is that I think we have to really look at how do you get out of this problem. And that the real answer to that is to grow as much food as you can, and as much as you can buy organic food wherever you can. And okay, people will say, well, I don't have any time, I don't have time. Well, that's true, but that's partly down to choices, right? We spend a lot of time on the internet, we spend a lot of time on our phones, we spend a lot of time watching programs. It all depends on how you look at it. If you look at it as work, growing food as work and a pain, then no, it's not very enjoyable. But if you have a different attitude about it, it can actually be quite relaxing, quite enjoyable to do. And when you think about the health benefits of even just growing like 20% of your food supply would make a huge difference to your health. And then I think the more you grow your own food, the more you become aware of the health factors of eating junk. I mean, I love junk, you know, I love burgers and kebabs and all that kind of stuff, chips and blah, blah, blah. I love it, but I realize that it's really, really horrible and toxic, most of it. And I mean, you can make your own burger, you can make your own pizza, etc., etc. Then, you know, you've got some control there. But, you know, when you go out to the regular places and you buy the stuff, you know, it's enjoyable at the time, you enjoy it, but how do you feel afterwards? Do you feel good afterwards? Do you feel healthier? No, well, you probably don't. I certainly don't. So it's become a crisis. It really is a crisis now, where people's bodies are full of toxins, and because of years and years of bad eating. It's bad for your brain, it's bad for your body, it's bad for you altogether. And you know, we're participating in a horrific industry which is about profits and not about human health. And what really makes me sad is the way that children are treated. That quite often it's the most toxic, horrific, unnatural, artificial food that children are eating, because it's marketed to them. It's marketed to them so much, and they go, oh, mummy, daddy, can I have this? Can I have that? I want the chicken nuggets. I want the sweeties, blah, 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 blah. And they can't help it. Of course they want it, but, you know, as parents, it's up to us to say, no, you can't have that. And it might be mean, and they'll be angry, and they'll be upset. But all this capitulation, what does it lead to? It just leads to your children growing up sick because you let them have this crap. You indulge them. They don't know it's crap. And if you try to explain it to them, they won't really understand. But I mean, things are changing. There are a few people. Vandana Shiva is someone who stood up to the Gates Foundation. She stood up. Various people have sued large companies. There's a particular case in America with, I think, a groundsman that sued Monsanto successfully. So there is a movement, there is a change. But we're trying to fight an enormous multi-billion-dollar industry. So really, it's really at grassroots that things have to change, that you're buying choices and actually taking more responsibility yourself, trying to grow things, especially things that have a lot of water in them, things like cucumbers and lettuce. There's a lot of water used there. Okay, so they can absorb huge amounts of soluble toxins. So you don't want things like glyphosate in your food. You don't want heavy metals in your food. You don't want any kinds of pesticides. You don't want all these E numbers, artificial additives in your food if you want to be healthy, if you want your children to be healthy. So at the end of the day, there's no one with a gun holding it to our head saying, right, you've got to buy this crap. You have to buy this crap or I'm going to shoot you. We do have choices. We do have the ability to make some decisions. So perhaps we should make those decisions. They might be hard decisions. It's going to cost more. Yeah, it's going to cost more to eat proper food, unless you grow a lot of it yourself. But, what do you want? Do you want to die young? Do you want to be horribly sick? Do you want your children to be sick? So, these are tough choices, but, we need to make the right choices. And the only way that any of these industries will change is if we force them. If we stop buying their crap, they have to change. They'll have to. They'll have no choice. Or they'll just go out of business. So it's up to us. For every single person that makes changes in their diet and demands better, it creates pressure on the food industry and Big Pharma, which is basically more or less the same industry as the food industry these days. It forces them to implement changes. Otherwise, they will go out of business if enough people demand things to be different. Okay, that's a bit of a long rant, but I feel quite passionate about this. I think this is probably the biggest problem humanity has. The fundamentals of food is really you are what you eat. Every cell in your body is replaced by new cells, and the fuel to replace everything is coming from your food. Every 7 years, your body has replaced all of its cells. And how does it do that? It does that with the food that we eat. So if you're eating crap, that means your body and your mind will deteriorate gradually over your lifetime because you're eating rubbish. And we don't have to do that. We do have a choice. Okay, rant over. Thank you for watching. Please give a like if you like this, and feel free to subscribe to my videos. Bye for now.